One of the most incredible examples of hospitality that I've ever seen would have to come from the story of Les Miserables. In it, Jean Valjean is a prisoner released on parole. He's considered a dangerous man. And because of that, he is unable to find anyone who will offer him work, anyone who will offer him a place to stay. One day, he's sleeping outside a church, and the bishop comes along and sees him. And the bishop invites him inside. He gives him a place to stay. He gives him a warm meal. He treats him as an honored guest. This dangerous man that nobody else wanted to have anything to do with, he treats him as an honored guest. And yet the whole time that he is there in the bishop's home, Valjean is waiting for the punchline of the joke. He is waiting for everything to be taken away, like some cruel joke, for him to be thrown back out into the street. And so in the middle of the night, Valjean gets up and he collects all of the silverware from the bishop's house and he makes a run for it. Well, early the next morning, he is brought back to the bishop's house by a couple of officers. And as they're returning the bishop's silver, they say that Valjean had the gall to say that that silver was a gift from the bishop. And the bishop, this is the part where I tear up every time I watch this movie. Because the bishop looks at Valjean, who is kneeling before him, and he just says, "That's right. But Valjean, you left my house so early this morning that you left the best behind." And he goes to his table and he grabs 2 silver heirloom candlesticks and he places them in Valjean's hand at the same time as he asks for the officers to release him. It is a powerful scene of love, of grace, of forgiveness. And it is a scene of hospitality, while also demonstrating that there is danger in hospitality. But it's this scene that reminds me every time I see it of just how far I still have to go to develop this quality of hospitality in my life. And I pray that I never stop having tears when I watch that scene, because it is this beautiful and incredible image of what Jesus calls us to be in this world. We are on our 3rd week of our open house series. We're looking at biblical hospitality. We want to heat up this value of hospitality in our personal lives, but also in the life of our church. And over this short 3-week series, we've looked at the creation story. We've seen that God is our very first host. He has given us a place to stay. We've seen that hospitality is part of the very heart, desire, and character of God. Last week, Pastor Blake unpacked the story of Abraham and the 3 strangers. We saw that sometimes we don't know just who we're showing hospitality to. It might be angels, it might be God himself. We saw that when we talk about hospitality, we are called to share it and show it, not just to the people who are like us, but to the people who are outside, to strangers. And today, I want to finish this series by looking at the hospitality of Jesus. Our passage today comes from Luke chapter 23, and I'm going to start reading at verse 32. It says this: 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him, Jesus, to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." This scene that Luke is describing for us, this is the very cornerstone of our faith. But it is also a scene that at first glance, it seems to have nothing to do with hospitality. This seems to be a scene of mockery and of isolation. Jesus is stripped naked. People are gambling for his clothes. People are sneering at him. They're calling out insults. The very sign that is written and placed above Jesus' head is there to mock not only himself, but also the Jewish leaders. This entire scene is designed to humiliate Jesus, to isolate him from others as he is killed. That's the point of crucifixion. And yet, in spite of all of this, the cross is a place of hospitality. Even though the first glance at this scene screams mockery and isolation, when we remember that is God himself who is on the cross. When we remember that, that scene changes. Jesus could have gotten down from the cross at any time. At any moment, Jesus could have said, "All right, that's enough," and stepped down. He could have even swapped places with any of those who were mocking him, but he didn't, because there was a purpose to what he was doing. There was an intention to what he was doing. That intention is hospitality. Because at the cross, Jesus is King. He is God himself on earth, fully man, fully God. He is the King of kings. His authority outranks anyone who was there that day and anyone who could have been there. Jesus is King. But at the cross, he is also the offering. He is the lamb that was to be slain. He is the one who was sacrificed to make amends. We see it in verse 34. Jesus prays to the Father. He says, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Father, I will take their failures. I will take their rebellion on myself. I will deal with it." Jesus is both King and he is offering. And when we celebrate communion later on in this service, this is what we're going to remember. His body was broken. His blood is poured out for us. Jesus meets us at the cross. It is this place of hospitality where he meets us with himself. As I was preparing this message over the past few weeks, I found a definition of hospitality from Scott Commode that says this: hospitality is an offer to identify with outsiders and to treat them like insiders. Hospitality is extending privilege across difference. This sums up exactly the kind of hospitality that we are talking about in this series. It sums up the hospitality that Jesus shows not just on the cross, but throughout his entire life and ministry. Because in all of Jesus' ministry, he spent time with outsiders. He hung out with those who were excluded from the club. He was the only innocent man, completely innocent, who has ever existed. He was innocent in both thought and deed, and yet he spent his life hanging out with sinners. He hung out with those who were excluded from the club. He went and saw those who felt like they were never seen or welcomed. Stop and think for a moment, just about this past week. Think about the people that you've interacted with, the people you go to work with, the people you go to school with. Who are the people that you rub shoulders with every day this week? Are they the same as you? Do they like the same things? Do they think the same things as you? Do they have similar life experiences to you? Because if that is all the people that you interact with, you need to expand your circle. You need to grow your circles. We need to follow Jesus' example. We need to go and hang out with those who are different from us. Now, that doesn't mean that you become like them. You don't have to change all the things that you do because Jesus didn't. Jesus didn't spend all of his time at the synagogue or the temple with the religious elite. He would have fitted in quite well there. He could have fitted in quite well there. He could have done a lot of good things there. But hospitality means to offer, to identify with outsiders, to spend time with them, not hold ourselves apart from them. But we also have to go further. We have to treat them as insiders. And that's what Jesus does as we continue reading this passage. Verses 39 to 43 say, one of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly because we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Jesus identifies with those criminals. He's not one. He is innocent, as one of them attests to. But Jesus identifies with them. He can relate to them. He understands the pain and the suffering that they are going through because he is in that exact same situation. And one of those criminals actually turns to Jesus and he asks for help. He sees there is something different about Jesus. While Jesus can identify with him, while Jesus relates to him, there is something different about him. And so this criminal reaches out and he asks for help. And how does Jesus respond? Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Jesus invites this criminal into the club. He lets him know that he belongs, that he matters. He is allowed to be part of what Jesus is doing. This is the bishop who invites Valjean into his house and treats him as an honored guest. Jesus is telling this criminal, you know you have failed. You know you've made mistakes. You know that you've stuffed up. But you are invited to come with me. I am welcoming you into my kingdom. I am welcoming you to be part of what I am doing. You are with me. What you have done in the past, that doesn't matter anymore. Instead, you are welcome to be part of what I am doing. This invitation is huge because hospitality is all about invitations. This is an invitation to show someone that they are welcome, that they matter. And at the cross, at this place of mockery, Jesus turns it into a place of hospitality. Because it is here that we are invited to enter his kingdom. This invitation is open to everyone and anyone to enter his kingdom. But there's more that happens, so let's keep reading. Verses 44 to 46 say, it was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. When he had said this, he breathed his last. Here, on the cross, in the middle of the greatest demonstration of hospitality we have ever come face to face with, we have the fact that it does not come freely. Luke describes how the curtain of the temple was torn in two, and in the very next breath we see that Jesus breathed his last. There is an intentional connection between these two events. The curtain that is being talked about here is the curtain that resided in the temple. It separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place. And it was about 18 meters tall. And if you're anything like me, that's going to mean absolutely nothing. So, a normal house from the floor to the ceiling is about 3 meters. This curtain was 6 stories tall. And it was about 9 centimeters thick. So that's about a hand width. This curtain was big and it was thick. And it was torn in two at Jesus' death. See, the purpose of this curtain is that it separated the place where God's presence resided, the Holy of Holies, from those who were unable to enter his presence due to sin. Once a year on the Day of Atonement, the high priest would go in. That is the only time somebody would go in to that place. That curtain was there and it was designed to protect us from God's holiness because of our sin, but at the same time, as well as protecting us from his holiness, protecting us from that, it reminds us that we're separated from God. It highlighted the fact that we were outsiders with God. We were built for his presence, and yet because of sin, we could no longer enter it. Mounting the cross, being mocked, that was not enough for Jesus to accomplish what he actually set out to do. He needed to pay the full and the complete cost. He needed to pay with his life to accomplish the hospitality that he set out to show us. Jesus' death tore that curtain and showed us that we could be invited into God's presence once more, that what had been broken had been restored. But to do so, Jesus had to pay the cost, because hospitality comes with a cost. Now, I'm not saying that hospitality should cost our lives. Inviting somebody round for a meal is not that scary. But we need to be aware that when we actually show hospitality, there is a cost involved with that. If we want to show true godly hospitality, there is a cost. And that's not a monetary cost. Hospitality is not something that you can just throw money at and hope that it will be better. Because when you do that, you miss the very heart and the intention of hospitality. You turn hospitality into showing off what you have. Hospitality becomes entertainment and not what it is meant to be. Jeff Christopherson writes, "We may go so far as to invite someone over for dinner, but we tend to do so with those who look like us, talk like us, believe like us, and act like us. And before we even consider having these friends around, we'll carefully engineer our homes and shape and polish our personas to communicate the best version of who we are, or at least the image that we hope to project." If hospitality is about identifying with outsiders and inviting them to become insiders, it means that we need to be able to show vulnerability. We need to be prepared to actually open up our homes and our lives to others, not as a perfectly clean and sanitized version of ourselves, not the self that is covered behind a mask. True hospitality is a heart condition that invites other people into relationship. But being yourself, showing that self to strangers, that requires vulnerability, and that's hard. There is a cost to that. There is always a cost when we have vulnerability, when we open ourselves up. There is always a chance that we might get hurt. Maybe it is that you will not be liked in return. Maybe your hospitality will be thrown back in your face. Maybe you'll be mocked for it. Maybe it is the cost of inviting someone out for a coffee and allowing them to see you don't actually have it all together. You don't have all the answers. You are not perfect. You are not in control of everything. Maybe the cost of hospitality for you is you actually have to invite people in to a situation that you can't control. You have to allow something unstructured to happen. Maybe you are an introvert or shy. And the idea of welcoming others in gives you anxiety. There is a cost that has to be paid to push through that, but there is such a great reward on the other side. Or maybe for you, the cost of hospitality is like that story that Blake shared last week. And it is allowing your day and your plans to change as you become aware of the needs of others. Maybe the cost of hospitality is actually paying for it in your time. Maybe the cost is even bigger than that. There's a story that comes from World War II, from a town in southern France called Le Chambon. And according to the book, Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed, there in that town, the villagers and the clergy, in the full view of the Vichy government, the government that took over when France was occupied. And in view of the government and the Nazi SS, those villagers and the clergy, they worked to save thousands of Jewish children and adults from certain death. That in itself is an example of the hospitality despite the cost. By working in that way, those villagers were putting themselves in danger, but to them, they needed to work to protect those who were being attacked. And in that town, there were many, many amazing stories. And one of them featured a couple named Andre and Magda. Now, the SS guards suspected them, and one evening they arrived at the house to arrest Andre. So what did Magda do? She invited the SS in to wait for her husband to return, and while there, she served them dinner. When she was later asked, how could she welcome such awful men, ones who would arrest not just the Jews she was hiding, but also her husband, how could she be so forgiving and decent? Her response floored them. What are you talking about? It was dinner time. They were standing in my way. We were all hungry. The food was ready. What do you mean by such foolish words as forgiving and decent? Wow. I don't know about you, but that response floors me. Hospitality was such a core part of who she was that she invited people in no matter the cost. But it also shows me that part of the cost of hospitality is that it forces us that we can't think in old terms anymore. We can't think in terms of us and them, friends and enemies, or even friends and strangers. The cost is we have to let go of those categories, those ways of thinking, and instead we have to just see people. Because when Christ died on the cross, he didn't die for his friends. He wasn't surrounded by people who just wanted the best for him. He was surrounded by those who mocked him. He was surrounded by those who were the ones who put him on the cross to suffer. And you might think, well, I wouldn't have been in that group. I wouldn't have been there and amongst those who did that. But the Bible tells us all have sinned. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. We have all made mistakes. We have all been separated from God. We are all in need of redemption, and we were all part of those that placed Christ on the cross. He did it for our sin. We were enemies of God, but he shows us hospitality. He paid the cost so that we were no longer seen as enemies, but instead we could be welcomed in to his kingdom. He invites us to belong and to be part of it. And this passage finishes with these words in verses 47 to 49. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. There might be a cost to pay for hospitality, but there is a powerful, powerful reward for it as well. When people see sacrificial hospitality like this, hospitality that costs more than just money, it costs vulnerability. It costs love to enemies. There is power in that. That centurion who praised God was amongst those who were mocking Jesus earlier. Those people who beat their breasts in sorrow, there were those who were amongst those who mocked Jesus earlier. There were those in that group who would have cried out, "Crucify him," and put him on the cross. They saw an incredible act of hospitality, and it moved something inside them. So is every act of hospitality going to change lives? Not at all. But if we actually choose to live out this kind of sacrificial hospitality, if we choose to demonstrate this, we demonstrate the lordship of Jesus Christ in our lives. We demonstrate that we are following in his footsteps. We are living out a powerful love. This is not a theoretical faith. This is real, tangible, visible love. This is the love of Christ. This is the light of the world and the hope for the world that shines out of us from Jesus. Just imagine for a moment what would happen if you were able to demonstrate this kind of hospitality. How would lives be changed if you were able to live out a love like this? A love that welcomed outsiders and treated them as honored guests, as insiders. A hospitality that didn't care about the cost. You didn't care if they saw the real you. In fact, you welcomed them in to see it. What would they see and what would they say if they saw that Christ's love was at the very center of it? Because when I imagine that, when I think about what that would look like, I see a world that is transformed. Transformed not from the top down, but from people to people relationships. One relationship at a time, one family at a time. Church, we have given you over this series a challenge for #OpenHouse. We've challenged you to invite someone into your home, to invite somebody into your life, somebody that you don't normally spend time with or interact with. We want you to extend hospitality to them. Now, this series might be finishing today, but this challenge doesn't end. We want you to do it, but we don't want you to do it just because we're up the front telling you to do it. We want you to do it because this is an opportunity to practice. This is an opportunity to learn the skills of how to actually show this sacrificial hospitality, this hospitality that costs something. This is a chance to learn the skills so that we can take this incredible hospitality and we can transform our streets. We can transform our neighborhoods. We can transform this city with hospitality. Is that a big dream? Yes. But I believe that my God can do big and amazing things. Because when we show hospitality, we demonstrate the love of Christ. Through hospitality, through the relationships that are built, God is able to use us to share his invitation. We share his hospitality. We share the greatest invitation that has ever existed to life as it was intended in his kingdom forever. Isn't that what we want to share with this world?